Rather than the, where were you born, or where'd you grow up, all those kind of things, you all can read about that. What I feel like is if you're an entrepreneur, you have what I call the defective gene. And if you're an entrepreneur that has been as successful as Sanjiv has, you probably have many XY chromosomes that are a little off kilter because now you're doing another startup. And so my first question is, what makes you want to get a speeding ticket going to work, and kind of what drives you, and what's your passion? Because there's nothing else that can supplant that, in a human being.
I think we all have to find our way to deliver value, right? Mm-hmm. And a lot of people do.
Maybe put it a little bit higher.
Oh yeah,
Or
a little
turn
higher.
off mute.
How's that?
You might need to go right here. Yeah.
Maybe it's not turned on.
Right. Yeah.
There's a mute button here. Yeah. There you go. How's that?
So I was saying, most of us have a passion to deliver value, right? Whether you're an artist, whether you're a school teacher, etc. And we all find our way of delivering value. And so I don't really think of myself as an entrepreneur per se. That's kind of an odd definition of what you do, right? Is an artist not an entrepreneur? Is a teacher not an entrepreneur? They're coming up and thinking of new ways to deliver value. So I always think about what are the things that I want to deliver value in, and then figure out what's the best way to go make it happen. In the sense, for me, it's not necessary to be my own boss. I can be working for someone if it's a group of people who's delivering value in an area that I'm passionate about. So I never thought of myself as an entrepreneur. I just thought of, hey, I used to like to do supply chain management. There was an opportunity there. I used to work at TI, and I felt that that opportunity was not filled really well. Mm-hmm. So I said, there's an opportunity to form a company there because the companies weren't doing, I think, the job that could have been done. And I happened to found that company. But even when there's some ex-I2 people here, I never thought of it as my company. It was a company of people who got together with that passion, and passion to deliver value to customers in our own unique way. And just like an artist, their main pleasure is not when the painting is sold. It's really somebody really appreciates the painting.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So a lot of I2 people, we felt great when a customer said that I just derived a lot of value from this software. Even after I2 has been sold, recently I visited a steel company in Ohio who's been a customer of I2, and they took me out to dinner and they said, we saved $300 million and our company is what it is because of the I2 software.
That's right.
So it's...
it gives you goosebumps.
Totally, it's like an artist, you've built or a carpenter, you built a chair, and somebody says this is a high quality chair I enjoy sitting on.
Mm-hmm. I was at Oracle in the mid-90s when you guys were growing and going, and the one thing I remember on your homepage to this point of $300 million is you had a ticker. And that ticker is how many dollars you saved your customer. And I thought it was one of the most impactful, I call them sparklers, impactful sparklers I've ever seen as part of a communication package. How did that come about? And kind of tell me the story about that.
Yeah, we all felt that we need to quantify what we're after, and the measurement was hard, and a lot of it was self-reporting, a lot of it was estimation, but it was like a mission statement. I felt most mission statements can't really be measured, and so I think we came up with the idea in a meeting that we should have a mission statement that's more measurable.
Demonstrable, right.
And it doesn't have to be, but it really rallied our people. And I think we had a challenge with what people thought was innovation. Mm-hmm. And we had extremely smart people. At one time, I think among startups, we had the largest percentage of masters and PhD graduates. And a lot of these people were really interested in innovation for the sake of innovation, which is good.
Right.
But we wanted to say innovation is what produces results in an area that we are all rallying and marching towards. So if one of our people came up with a great way of cleaning houses, that's value to society, but that was not in line with our mission. So our mission was to be defined where everyone understands that if I'm being innovative, how do I measure what I'm doing? Or if I'm a salesperson, how do I measure what I'm doing? Besides the financial measures, we said all of us measure our task by how much value we're creating for customers in the end.
Exactly. And in terms of that culture, one of the lessons, I spent my first 7 years at Dell, and one of the lessons that I learned is the people that were there, they were passionate about what they were doing and not in it for the money. When they became independently, they were technically volunteers. The ones that were mercenaries were gone and the organization lost that value, but the ones that were truly passionate with the mission, they stuck with you, and those are the people that I thought added the most value, not only in the creation process, but also in the sustaining process. Did you see that similar to I too?
Totally. I think overall, there's this view that money drives innovation, creativity, etc. I personally don't subscribe to that.
No, it's true.
I believe that...
What about sloppiness, really? You got too much money.
No, the hunger for money.
Okay.
And I think this view is controversial, but my view is that most great product, creativity, etc. comes if you're interested in the creativity itself.
Right.
Once you have the goal for money, then I believe that it causes a certain kind of striving. It's just, I've been using the example of an artist. If an artist paints for the money, I don't believe that their painting or their art would be as good.
As good, right. When you look at the team that you formed, a very wise entrepreneur told me that the first 10 people you hire will oftentimes determine the vector that your company goes on. And in an early stage team, you have, you want diversity of ideas, you want diversity of skill sets, and oftentimes people want a collaborative culture, and other people that want a combative culture because they have beliefs that one is better than the other. When you were forming your first team at I2 and now 09, what are the things that you look for in those first key hires that you go after?
At I2 there was a lake outside.
Lake Carolyn?
No, there's a small lake behind the DoubleTree.
Yeah. In Irving?
Yeah.
Right, yeah, it's called it's the largest lake in Irving.
Oh, it is.
And the largest lake in Plano is the one in PepsiCo. That's another one.
Man-made too.
Oh, both of them.
And the test was if you could walk on it, you could. And Ken Sharma, who is the co-founder of I2, he actually made a statement that if Sanjiv's resume came across his desk, he would throw it in a waste paper basket. And he often said, we should make up a resume just like Sanjiv's, send it to his desk and see if it would make it.
So when you would see a resume that piqued your interest enough to spend a little time with them, what are the things you were looking for in that interview?
I think it's hard to specify, but really what we look for is how interested are they in our business. And one clear test was how prepared they were.
Right.
And people who were prepared, the people who usually got important appointments are the ones who interviewed us instead of we interviewing them. They came and said, hey, what about this? Why aren't you doing this instead of this, etc. And we say, wow, that would fit really well into our culture. And also, just to finish, I feel that when we started out, we had great first 10 people, but we were limited. I think a great culture is where the person number 300 could actually come and add and change the direction of the company. And both the inside culture should be such that you're able to receive that input. It says a lot about a culture that is not that insulated. And it's not that we did that perfectly.
That's what you strove for.
Yeah.
And that, I would assume, helps you attract a lot higher talent. Because those kind of people, I call them volunteers. It's, yes, they're looking for a job, but at the levels that you want to hire, much anywhere they want to. And the question is, why did they go to I2 as opposed to SAP or Oracle or other companies that you were blowing out of the water at the time? And I think it's that belief that it is a meritocracy and that it's not based on seniority, it's not based on title, it's based on the power of your ideas to add value to a customer.
Totally.
Is that something that you all agree with?
Totally. Now, I would say that there was a difference between that idealism and what was actual. There's always hierarchies that develop, but idealism is still
right. So here's my question. TI is the antithetical orientation to that, at least my impression of TI. And my uncle's been there 30 years. I have great respect for him, and we'll talk about that in a second. Not my uncle, but TI. That culture didn't really come out of TI, did it? Or those lessons that you learned there? Where did you get that philosophy and that concept?
I learned a lot at TI, and we actually used a lot of methodology. Pat Haggerty, if you've heard of him, he's one of the people who's credited with setting the management methodology at TI.
Okay.
It's totally brilliant, and we had a variety of. Still saying I stopped working at TI in 88. But TI
wasn't born in 88.
Right. I learned a lot in TI. One thing, for example, was the idea program. Anyone could have an idea and apply for it.
Oh, wow.
And you got, at that time, a $25,000 grant or a $50,000 grant. I think a lot of the speech toys that became a big part of TI business came out of the idea program.
Oh, that's
And the idea program was where if you have an idea that your boss should not be able to muzzle the idea if he or she didn't agree with it, it went to a different idea committee. So TI had a lot of things to foster creativity and innovation. And the proof is really in how innovative the company was.
Right. They've been amazing at how they've moved from really a defense contractor to a semiconductor company to DLP over 30, 40 years.
Yeah, and actually that's not the transition. They started as a geophysical.
Geophysical, right. That's right.
Even they got into semiconductors, kind of independent of the defense business, but not totally.
Okay.
And again, I'm not that familiar with that part of the history, but overall, when I was there, it was a very innovative culture. It didn't matter what my position was, it mattered what my ideas were.
Right, and that's where you got that from.
And the people higher on the hierarchy were very respectful of that, and they were really encouraging of good ideas.
To that point, one thing that I've always admired TI for, and I'm talking about both sides of my mouth here, is if you look at the companies that have come out of people that came out of IT, and a lot of people don't know the Compaq. I had some time with Rod Canyon, and they were in the Winchester disk drive division in Houston, and Compaq wanted to move them to Dallas. They said, no, we want to do this, and they left and they did that. And then Mostec started in 1967. It was the world's largest DRAM manufacturer, and a gentleman named Bob Palmer was CEO, and he became CEO of Digital and sold his company to Ben Rosen, who used to be at TI and Compaq. So it's interesting to see the innovation that comes out of there, and that culture is interesting because I spent time at Dell, that you don't see that, and I spent time at Oracle, and you do see that culture. I think it goes back to the respect for the engineer and the respect for their ideas, but what are your thoughts in terms of why those cultures like an IBM or an Oracle or TI actually spawn a lot of successful companies? Or do you disagree with that?
No, I think TI is true. I think the joke is it's the training institute with the tiny income.
Okay, there you go.
I guess tiny income is something I didn't agree with. they paid me fairly well.
Right.
In fact, I always wondered why they pay me so much. Because it was so fun. It was like going and playing video games, right? Yeah, and somebody's paying you to do that. Yeah, and I used to work in the artificial intelligence laboratory. At that time, it was one of the most innovative labs around, and you got a lot of freedom.
Right.
And I just felt it was a great place to work. There was there's tremendously good talent around. I think that makes a lot of difference, just working with people you respect and can learn from.
Right.
And when I worked at TI, at 11 at night, there'd be people working. At 4 in the morning, you could show up, and sometimes you had to because hardware was hard to find. So if you wanted enough compute time, you would show up at 4 in the morning and to run your compiles, etc. And there would be people there.
Wow.
You could ask someone what needs to be done.
So if you enjoyed that so much, what drove you to leave that culture and go off into the abyss and do something that was much less stable?
That requires being logical.
That's the DNA strand.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right, Joey.
Lately, I've been actually, my passion is how humans make decisions. Historically, if you look at my companies, I2 and O9, they're focused on organizational decisions, making better decisions for organizations. I2 was in the supply chain area. O9, which is the new company, is in the broader business planning. Is it better to give a 20-cent promotion on my product, or is it better to use that marketing in dollars? It's all about making smart decisions faster. But lately my interest has been personal decisions, how people make decisions. And one of the fascinating studies is that certain things where you do a fMRI of a human mind, and you ask humans, you pose a decision, and you say, when you decide, press this button, and the fMRI shows that you made the decision way before you press the button.
Wow.
Right? So our unconscious mind is extremely powerful, makes a lot of decisions for us. Then the logical mind is a justification. So if my intention was not to eat the chocolate cake, but to eat the apple, and I'm eating the chocolate cake, then I'm spending a lot of time justifying life is too short. Anyway, I was really good for the last week, etc. So I guess it's that kind of decision. I one day decided that I want to quit and start I2. And we were expecting our first baby, and my boss called me in, and I said, I think the pressure of the work is getting to you. You need a counselor, and we'll pay for it. And I said, no, fine. I know what I'm doing. And
Just kind of started from there?
yeah, it started from there, and often people ask me, so you're a risk taker, right? I don't think of myself as a risk taker at all, and I talk to a lot of entrepreneurs. I don't know many entrepreneurs who are risk takers. I think the risk takers are gambling somewhere. And even those people, I don't think they perceive the risks as different people do.
Right.
So for what an entrepreneur does, they rarely perceive it as that risky. In the sense, they kind of know, and they have optimism, or hopefully many of them follow what a dictum that's really dear to me is that the journey is the reward.
Right, yeah. People here, remember Steve Blank, the Lean Startup movement and all that? He talks about entrepreneurship, and he has this kind of professorial orientation. It's a temporary organization in search of a permanent business model. Technically, that's right? But my view of entrepreneurship is the undertaking of a business enterprise with the complete, total, utter lack of respect of the resources you currently control. Is that something that resonates or no? Because I totally agree with you that we don't view ourselves as risk takers. Other people would, leaving this steady job, and I think you were coding in your house for like 2 years on your own, which obviously requires a heck of a lot of discipline and belief in yourself. And it's not risky if you believe in what you're doing and you're confident. Other people may look at it as a risk, but I think what we do is we try to mitigate risk. Is that something you share, or do you have a different view?
No, I think pretty much similar views, but if you ask me the question, if you knew everything that had to go right for I2 to be successful, would you have done it? Probably not. I knew very little, right? And on the other hand, after doing that, that's something that I find very valuable. I tell most people that if you want everything figured out, in no matter what you want to do, it's not just enterprise or entrepreneurship, that's not going to work. Life is too complicated. We control very little of it. If I needed to know everything that needs to happen, I needed to know the end design really well. Right. Then we would barely do anything. So entrepreneurship is just like that. You start with a vision and then step at a time. There's continuous cycles of learning, and sometimes they happen, sometimes you don't. And then just like for me, if I want to go from here to New York, a lot of things need to happen right. And sometimes they don't happen, and my flight is canceled, and I'm back in Dallas. Right. I mean, that happens in entrepreneurship, and I think the enterprises that didn't work didn't have anything specifically wrong with them. It's many times a game of chance.
Right. It's some luck. Exactly.
Yeah. And surely there's some people who are more skilled than others in navigating this uncertain territory.
Right.
And the mechanisms to do that. And so it's a mixture.
Right. So you've gone full cycle. You've had a very successful company. In my view, it literally changed the ERP world for supply chain. And I was working at Oracle at the time, so it wasn't like I was there at I2, but I really admired what you all were doing. One question, a lot of people get asked, successful people, is if you have the collective learnings of what you've learned so far, and you wish you could go back, there's always the, hey, what would you like to know then, what you know now? Is that even a relevant question for you? Because there's so many variables that go into it, going back into your decision process. Comment.
No, totally. I think doing 09 the second time around, it's much easier, and we use a lot of those principles. And I think simple things, entrepreneurs typically, sometimes with good reasons, sometimes not with good reasons, have a false sense of urgency.
Okay.
Right? And they do things much faster, or have a need to do things much faster than reality requires. Some of us ex-I2 people were talking about the enterprise domain relative to, you go to an enterprise and look at their systems today.
Right.
And you say, how much more sophisticated are they than what we saw 10 years ago?
That's a good question.
Right? Things haven't changed as rapidly as one would expect. So many times there's more time to do things right. I'm not totally privy to what happened, but I'm told Apple took a lot of time to get the iPhone designed and working correctly. When it was first, prototypes started coming out, I think there's a story that the battery used to run out in 10 minutes. And so there are many cycles of learning. On the other hand, you could put out a phone anytime in a year, because there's this focus on quick, lot of go to market quickly. And I think many of I2's things that we would do differently doing it over again is looking at certain things and saying, I do want to capture that hill, but I want to do it where my product is so far superior and gives customers so much more of a aha, oh my God, this is awesome experience. But we didn't have the wherewithal. Many times we didn't have the cash, we were bootstrapping, etc. So, but even within our limitations, we could have done many things much better in hindsight. People choices are really important, and all executive teams make the mistake of betting on a very good athlete who's not necessarily a great team player. And we made a bunch of those mistakes where I'm personally a sucker for IQ. And if you have great IQ, I want you on my team. Right? And I did a lot of that. Now, no. At 09, we will spend a lot of time figuring how you would fit into the team and what kind of person are you? Are you the kind of person who needs to be right? Because businesses always have this problem or this thing where you're at an intersection and you have to go left or you have to go right. It's good to be thoughtful about that decision, but at some time you need to make that decision. I want to go right, you want to go left, and you fundamentally believe in it. And we decide to go left. And when we're moving left, I'm sitting down and saying, wow, I told him.
Yeah.
And when it turns out to be wrong that we went left, I get excited about it.
Which is,
Hey, I told you, man.
yeah. You win, but the organization loses, so it's a Pyrrhic victory.
Exactly. So at O9, we're very careful on the kind of people who are really team players, don't have that much of an ego, and are really willing to check their ego at the door, but want to do great things.
I want to go down that line, but don't let me forget to go back to his comment about scaling, because I think that's really important. So let's talk about your vetting of these people. Do you use some of the modern tools that are online to do, kind of behavior analysis, or is it just your gut, or is it through the combination of many interviews, or do you use a combination of both electronic and gut and interviews?
I too had an extremely large network, so a lot of people we've hired are people we already know.
Right.
So, but going forward, particularly in areas that are testable, I think testing is extremely valuable. The reason is that, let's talk about the process of interviewing.
Right.
Who interviews well? Who interviews well? Somebody who interviews often, right?
Right.
Practice.
Exactly. And a good listener, not a talker.
Right. So in an interview, all you've proven is that you interview well. It doesn't mean that you do the job.
That's true.
So that's what interviewers need to keep in mind. So at I2, I used to ask my hiring leaders, are you good at interviewing? Most of them said, yeah, I'm very good at that. I said, what do you base that on? And that's when the answers started getting shallow.
Yeah.
So I said, let's do a test. Whenever we hire someone, let's write down what we're going to say about this person 1 year from now.
That's really like a gap analysis. You're starting a baseline.
Let's read it. In fact, we started giving some hiring managers what they thought about their hire 1 year from now. They would read it and say, oh my God, I'm really not so good at this.
That's really an innovative tool.
Right.
That's really, really interesting.
Right.
I know today you've got your network and you're still at a point where you're not having to hire outside that network, but going back to when you were scaling up I2, or best practices that you've seen, is it using these electronic tools that you're online to do behavioral, or is it some more innovative things like what you talked about in terms of establishing a baseline?
Well, that doesn't help you. That just tells managers they're not
Hey, but at least you have to admit you have a problem.
But where things are testable, for example, we do hire people outside our network. Probably 50% of our team right now is not people we knew before.
Right.
For example, in software development, we do actual testing. And I think it's more easy to do quantitative tests there. In other areas, right now, what I tell our hiring leaders is that the interview is just a point of entry. Right. So the interview is mainly to reject people. But if they get through that gate, then you have to find references, and so you ask a person for the references. They give you 3. Those go in the waste paper basket.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, who doesn't have 3 great references? But anyone you're hiring is probably at least 20 years old, right? Or more likely at 09, much more. And then, so you say, go find someone that has known them for 5 years. Right? We feel that's the more reliable test. And then when you do the interview, you ask relatively quantitative questions. So if I'm asking someone about you, Lee, and I ask how innovative you are, let's say, no, he's very innovative. And we say, no. Out of all people you know, is he in the top 10% or top quartile, or is he in top 50%? Suddenly the person who's you're asking for a reference has to think a little more. And if they say that you're in the top 5% of all creative people they've met, then I'll say, okay, that's good. Then I should write that back in my reporting, such that the rest of my team says that. And then if I'm the hiring manager, then 1 year later I should say, I'm hiring Lee because I think he's top 5% innovator. And at end of 1 year, I want to test whether
was really true. Yeah.
So largely we rely on on very good reference testing,
Right.
and really seeing that we know the person. And we're not interested in just brilliance. We just want to know that we know the person.
You have an understanding of what motivates them, what you can expect from them, ergo you can lead them.
Totally.
Yeah, that's interesting. We can talk forever. I really enjoying this. I hope you guys are as well. We're going to do Q&A at the end. I do want to go back to this comment you made earlier about I2 and how you were starting to scale. I'm reading a very interesting book, if you all have never read it. I think it's called Venture Capitalists at Work. And it's a Q&A, and it's interviewing why startups fail. And there's quantitative analysis coming out of Eric Ries and out of Steve Blank that startups fail because they start to scale too early. They feel like they've got to move, they've got to get sales, et cetera, and oftentimes they haven't really turned and tested their theses about what the customer really needs. You all obviously were the fastest company in software history to ever get to $200 million, so if there's something called product market fit, you hit the bullseye. When did you feel like you had that, and what were you doing at that time that allowed you to feel like, okay, let's put the kerosene on, let's put the gas on, because we know that we've got a product that customers will really clamor for?
I think at that time there were market signals where inventories were very high. There was this whole concept of agility that management teams were struggling with. Lead times needed to be shrunk, and there was this view that more and more commerce will go to the net, and lead times would have to be very short to be able to deliver. That was one movement that was happening. The other was the move towards mass customization, where there was this view that customers will need increasingly customized products delivered fast. So there was...
So we did at Dell.
Yeah.
They said the manufacturing model wouldn't take them past $250 million in sales in 1988, and they make that in a month in net profit now.
Right. So the demand was very high, particularly for the concept of agility. Companies knew that their decision-making processes were slow.
Right.
They weren't coordinated to what was happening in the market. Or when a supplier called and said they're going to be late on one part, they couldn't really figure out quickly that they need to delay the other parts.
Right.
Or if needed, air freight that part, etc. So I think that continues to be the problem where companies are not able to make decisions quickly or the right decisions quickly. So I think the market signals were clear.
And you had macro issues like inventory and trends like mass customization that you helped to enable.
I think so, a bit.
Yeah, excellent. Well, thank you very much. I could go on for hours. But I do want to open up to questions from you guys. Gerard?
Yes, thank you. Well, I think we all have something in common. You worked for Dell, you worked at I2, I worked at UPS, so I know about Dell, I know about I2 because of all the teachings. But my question...
Speak up real loud so everybody hears it.
Yeah, my question to you is...
How about this?
Oh, yeah, here we go. Thanks. Is it hot? Oh, there we go.
Yeah, so my question to you...
Go ahead and repeat what you were saying real briefly.
So, yes, I worked at UPS, so I know about Dell because you were a large customer, and because of transportation, I too were very impressed with your product. So the question I have for you is, once you left TI and you started working on the I2, at what point, or was there anywhere along the line where you're saying, what did I do here? My wife has a baby, and I'm doing this thing here. I mean, at what point did you say, I'm going to continue or not continue? I mean, what made you continue doing what you were doing? Was there ever any time a doubt? I mean, you're talking about market here, it's all there, and that's all fine and dandy, but what I want to know is, deep inside, when did you say, yeah, I know I have something here?
It's many years ago, but the early days were interesting because during the night I wrote code, and during the day I made cold calls. And the cold calls were actually quite simple. If I got through to someone, they'd say, how many customers? I said, none. How many employees? Well, you're talking to them. And the phone went down. But I could make many calls. So later when we had telemarketing groups, I would always say, how many calls do you make in a day? They would say, whatever, 10, 15. I said, I did double that, and I wrote code. I show. And so the initial breakthroughs came very slowly, and for a long time there was just no response. And I often thought about my boss from TI, boss's boss, saying that, are you crazy? You're trying to sell something to large enterprises and they don't buy from entrepreneurs like you. But the breakthrough really came because we wrote a brochure on what's wrong with supply chain management and how it needed to be done. And we mailed it out. Those days there was no email, so you shoved it into packets and you mailed them to people. And there were a few people who read the brochure, and I made one call. And the gentleman, Neil, on the other side, I don't remember his last name, I should, he said, this is... it's one of the best written brochures I've seen, and that's exactly the problem with supply chain management. But we don't have a budget this year. Call next year. By the way, that was one of my most exciting calls because someone actually called. Somebody loves me. And he said, call next year. So since I didn't have many people to call next year, it went on back. And of course, I did call next year, and I wasn't expecting much. I thought that was a good way to validate. Just send me away.
Okay, right.
But when I called next year, he said, yeah, I've been expecting you to call, and we went to come in for. We weren't in the budget. 15 vendors were. Wow. And they were going to call 15 vendors to start doing presentations. This was General Dynamics in Fort Worth. And so we were one of 15 vendors. And one quick story, because I think to entrepreneurs this will be useful. So it was my only presentation after, I don't know how many thousands of mails and how many thousands of calls. So guess what you do is you prepare tremendously, right?
Going back to your interview.
Yeah, I had my deck, really well prepared, and I went into this meeting, and there were a bunch of people. It was like presenting to a committee, and a lady called Donna Hawker, 2 slides into it, she said, Sanjiv, I don't think you understand what our problem is. So I asked her what her problem was, and they started describing the problem, and we started discussing the problem. And at the end of 60 minutes, they said, your time is up. And I hadn't done my presentation. So I said, okay, this is the time I go back to TI. Because I had my chance, I blew it. And because there was nothing else in the pipeline. It was, this was my only pipeline, and I completely blew it. And of course, one thing led to another. They called me for the next set of presentations. It was down to 3 vendors, and they selected us. And when I later asked them what happened, they said, you're the only one who listened. Yeah. So I didn't do the pitch. It's not because I had a strategy. It's not because somebody told me you should listen. I was deeply interested in the problem.
And knowledgeable about the problem.
Knowledgeable, I don't really know, because it was in the defense industry. I didn't know that. I had deep interest in the problem. And so as an entrepreneur, if you're deeply interested in your customer, right, and not so objectives driven, which is I have a presentation, must do presentation, and I'm not doing this to show off. It happened to be my luck. I was pretty upset with myself. So often I taught I2 salespeople, listen. Listening is really hard, including for me. Talk to my kids to see if I'm a good listener. And so listening is really hard, but I think good entrepreneurs really listen to customers. They have deep intrinsic interest in their customers. Sorry to...
No, that was excellent. That was really good. Any other questions? Yes.
What's the significance of the company names? I209.
Okay. That's the most typical question I get. Is it really? Right.
There's a pattern. What's the reason for a letter and a number, I2 and 09?
Since that's the most interesting question I get, a little diversion. My passion now is another organization I'm working with. The working name right now is Inner Magic. We're really looking for a name. And that business, I shouldn't call it business yet because we don't know whether it's going to be nonprofit or whatever. Its focus is personal change. The thesis really is, why is it as humans, we know what we want to do, but we can't really do it. I want to eat healthy, but when there's a chocolate cake, I decide to do that. And but not just in area of eating, any personal change you want, whether it's in area of anxiety or it's in area of relationships, changing behavior, right? So we're doing a name search, and by the way, if you guys can recommend a name. So one of the people working on the naming said, why are we spending so much time? It's going to be something -5. Ken Sharma, my partner, came up with the name, and the joke is it stood for 2 Indians because he was from India too. But I think what Ken had in mind was intelligent information systems. He never told anyone that. There are many jokes about what the name is, and 09, we are in the business of delivering more optimization to customers, so that's where the O comes from, and 9 is the highest numeral. But really, we couldn't find a better name with a URL. Yeah, it's an issue. It's an issue. One last question. Yes?
Do you suggest any, in this day and age, inexpensive ways to test your idea and whether there's a market for it before you go out and spend a bunch of money?
Repeat that if you can with the, can you test your idea?
Can you suggest some inexpensive ways to test your idea as to whether there's a market for it before you go out and spend a bunch of money? I mean, I've seen some people doing Google AdWords campaigns, that kind of thing. Anything innovative you've seen along that line?
That's really not my expertise, but I think in most areas where I don't have expertise, we always think a lot about how one would do it. And generally, most of these things apply to the 80-20 rule. There is 20% of the data that has 80% of the importance, and you have to somehow get to that. And while I'm not giving you much help there, there's usually an easy way of knowing. You won't know with great amount of certainty, and it's like climbing steps. And you will know the first step, saying, yeah, I think I'm in the right ballpark. And then you say, what is the next test? What is the next test? And I think the safest way is to find knowledgeable people with the right intuitions in that area, and listen to their answers. You don't take their answers for as face value. Yeah, but listen really carefully. Sometimes tells you can change your ideas a lot. So I personally ask whoever. If I'm at an airport, I'll ask people about my idea. I'll ask the flight attendant about my idea. Sometimes it's not what they're saying, it's how you pose the questions. Just asking allows you to get very precise about what you want to know, and you start developing answers to the question yourself.
Yeah.
Am I making sense?
Yes.
One thing I'd add to that is Mark Andreessen, who founded Netscape, and he's got a venture firm called Andreessen Horowitz. A gentleman named Brad Feld, who's in Denver, who has a company called The Foundry. And then a gentleman named Fred Wilson, who's at Union Square Ventures in New York. He was one of the funders of Twitter. They have a concept called the authentic entrepreneur. And the authentic entrepreneur is what they look for, and that's the person that is solving their own problem. And they represent such a large market share of those same people that they understand to the core. They have a passion, like you had a passion in the meeting with General Dynamics about that solution, and they have a passion about it, and they understand it. And it's very different than a corporation thinking, hey, let's go get into this market because we think the macro economics are interesting. It's the antithetical piece of that. It's called the authentic entrepreneur, and you can read things about it. But to his point, find people that are knowledgeable and listen to them.